Welcome to another edition of Fresh, Fast, and Easy. I'm Michael Weinberg-Lynn, co-owner and president of Osprey Seafood, and we're here to bring you on the wonderful trip down Oyster Lane. With me today, I have my manager up at our retail, Chris Christopherson. He's going to help me walk us through bivalve heaven.
Welcome. Hey, just happen to have one. Cheers.
Cheers. Always good to drink.
That's very nice. What do we have today?
We are drinking Toolbox Pinot Grigio. All right, well, welcome to Oysters. And on this show, we talk about one species, one type of oyster, or one type of fish, and we discuss the pros, cons, the issues, etc. with that fish. In this case today, we're going to cover one of the most mysterious or hyped or beloved bivalves we have, the oyster. Now before, in the past, in the previous show, we had a bivalve discussion with scallops. This time we're doing oysters, related by the bivalve, but totally different in how they live their life. So, first of all, oysters. The history on oysters, we have dated all the way back to pre-Roman times. Now, how the heck did they do that? Well, when you eat an oyster, you get a shell.
First of all, how hungry was the first person to ever eat one of these? That's what I want to know.
Here you go, Jonathan Swift, a brave man that first ate an oyster. And as you can imagine, this is truly a rock that we've opened up and eaten.
Living rock.
So we take the shell after it's eaten and you toss it aside. And all throughout Europe and Northern Africa and the Middle East and even in the North America, you'll find these mounds of oyster shells. Those are called middens. And they're actually able to carbon date a midden back to the time. So we know that the oysters have been around since way before Roman times. And of course we know the Romans ate them during their days of debauchery and orgies, so they thoroughly enjoyed them. And they've been enjoyed here in North America for well over 50,000 years that they can date. So that's the story and the history of oysters. But what is it about oysters that intrigues us so much? The oyster starts its life as the eggs and the sperm join in the water. They start floating around for a week or two, and then they lay and settle on something hard, some substrate. This is what separates us from the scallop. Okay, the scallop, when it starts to form and it's actually become a body, starts to propel itself through the water column. The oyster settles, stays, and that's where it stays forever, unless man gets involved.
And we do, don't we?
We do get involved. I would like to try them out, please.
Excellent. Just had one.
So,
what do we have here, by the way?
Well, we have a whole smitten varieties of oysters, and we will talk about these in time. But over here in this corner, we're looking at a Malpec. In this corner over here, we have the Reach Island. This big honker is an Evening Cove from Washington. These are Kumamotos, the beloved kumis. We will talk about that. These are Olympias. These are Beausoleils, Fanny Bays, and Cushis. And they're found all over North America.
And these are all cold water oysters versus the warm water oysters you get down in the Gulf.
Right, which will bring us to a great conversation. We talk about issues in the Gulf and when not to eat them. We will get there. So the life cycle, an oyster starts its life for its first year as a male. That's it. 1 year, then you go to female. And you spend the rest of your life.
What a rip-off.
They seem to enjoy it.
They're in touch with their feminine side.
They are very in touch with their feminine side. As soon as they build up enough nutrients and fats in their bodies, they make the switch over. So the first year, they set the sperm out, and that's when that's their last shot, because they only spawn once a year, and then they're done. That's their life as a male. That's it. So that's the basic life cycle of an oyster. What happened, and which was so exciting and cool about oysters, especially on the Pacific side, the Northwest, is absolutely incredible. What happened in the 1970s, they realized that, you know, we have this great chance of learning about oysters and trying to grow them out. And that's when the oyster boom occurred. And if you notice, oysters have really taken off over time. You know, before the 60s, in the 60s and 70s and 50s, you had 2 or 3 types of oysters. Now you've got hundreds of types. So let's start with the West Coast. Okay, this is an Olympia oyster. This is a native West Coast oyster. This is the only native West Coast oyster. And could you shut those for us?
I'd be happy to. They're tough to do, by the way.
They are tough to do. They require talent. The Olympia oyster was very prevalent as a food source till about the 40s. And then by then we had eaten so many of them and pretty much wiped them out. 50s they'd waned, and 60s pretty much gone on the coast.
It looks like there.
We needed oysters here on the Pacific. So in 1970, a couple of Japanese marine biologists shipped over some Japanese seedlings and brought us over a supplement to the Olympia, and that would be the G-gas, which is the Latin name for it, and that's what you will see on our West Coast.
See, that's kind of really deep. It's almost like a
Deep.
boat.
And fluted. Look at the shell. Really fluted shell,
But the Beausoleil also is like a boat,
but flat.
but flat as well.
Right. So what they did in the 70s is started growing and cultivating these oysters, which brings us to a very interesting thing that happened. With wine, you know how the earth is so important, terroir is so important. With oysters, it's the same way. Okay? The water that an oyster is grown in just gives it all of its flavor. See, an oyster is a filter feeder, meaning it'll stay in that one rock for a long time for its life and do nothing but suck water in, take out all the nutrients and minerals, and push out clean water. Which is actually a good fact, because back in the day, back probably in the 40s and earlier, the oysters of the Chesapeake Bay would actually, within 3 days, be able to recycle all of the water in the Chesapeake. That's how wonderful filter feeders they are. Unfortunately, we ate them all.
You get too many people.
We do that. They're getting better. We supplanted, we put in some safety regulations and some growing regulations, and now they're coming back. It takes a year for them to filter through the Chesapeake and clean the water. So you've gone from 3 days to a year. So in this evolution with the North Pacific and the oysters, we found that if you grow an oyster in one area of a stream as opposed to another area, you will get a whole different flavor, the terroir. Okay, so and take this, an oyster that's grown right at the beginning of, say, a stream where it meets the ocean. So you got a big salt water, freshwater mix. Okay, that's going to have a very briny flavor. Then you move down the stream, down the river a little bit, and all of a sudden you have more fresh water than you do salt water. You're going to get a totally different flavor on it. And this is where you get the differences in your oysters. Okay, you get the different flavors. So this is all leading to something, believe it or not. Commercially, we only have 5 varieties of oysters in the United States. That's it, 5. Now, you've been, some areas they venture. I'm not going to go to Europe, and sometimes they reach. So,
Okay.
You've been to an oyster bar and had 10, 12 oysters on the oyster bar, and you're going, how can they have 5 if they have 10 or 12? What's going on? Well, this oyster, and this oyster, and this oyster, actually, we'll throw them all in. The Cushy, the Chef's Creek, or the Fanny Bay, the Evening Cove, the Kumamoto, and the Reach Island are all the same seedling. They are genetically related. Okay, they're called a Pacific oyster or a G-gas. The oyster here, the Malpec and the Beausoleil, are Atlantic oysters. We call them Virginicus. Okay, so you got one in the Pacific, one in the Atlantic. The original oyster, Kumamoto, is a species of himself, okay? And it's a Kumamoto, period. That was the only one. The reason I brought this up with G-gases is there are no more true Kumamotos left. They are grown only in laboratories. You'll find them at UC Davis and in Japan, true hybrids. I mean, the true creature. Now they're hybrided with the G-gas, okay? And then you have the Olympia. Our native oyster is a species of itself. So there's 5, and the 6th I do not have here, unfortunately, is a flat oyster, which you'll find in France, the Bellon, okay? Which is a very, very good oyster, excellent eating, and some people...
And the French will tell you it's the best ever.
Well, they tell you that back. So, in fact, the Bellon oyster lends itself to probably the most famous oyster, the fin de Claire. The fin de Claire, grown in Europe, is actually green. You open it up and the actual oyster, let's look at an oyster, by the way. The whole oyster meat will be green. And the reason it's green is it's filter feeding the copper and all the minerals of the water, but it's assimilating really the copper. And that is turning it green.
I'll be darned.
The negative part of that, or the positive, depending on who you are, when you eat it, you're going to get that copper flavor. I enjoy it. It really hits you in the back of the mouth. It's an amazing flavor. I think it goes great with beer. Love the wine, but it goes great with beer. But you better be ready for it because it's got a lot of flavor. So that's our Bellon, or our flat, excuse me.
For me, it's the cushy oyster. Probably got the most copper flavor, the most mineral content of all of these. A few of these have the same. I would say that the Fanny Bays, along with these, as long as these are probably the same flavor profile to me, to my palate. Mm-hmm. My personal favorite, I have to go with the Beausoleil every day, just because it's such a clean taste. It tastes like you're sitting on the beach, you just got hit with a wave.
I agree, but that's a traditional Atlantic oyster, and it's a part chemical makeup of the oysters, of what they assimilate and what they hold in and what they get rid of, as well as its environment. The Atlantic oyster is almost notoriously more briny. Okay, so you'll get that traditionally. And the West Coast oyster will be a little bit more minerally or melon. We won't go there.
I don't care for that.
No, but you'll get more of a mineral tinge to it than you will with the Atlantic oyster.
Tell you what, I'm gonna throw a couple of these guys on the grill here real quick.
All right. What are you gonna do?
We are going to barbecue a couple of these big guys. We call these barbecues at the store. Just for lack of a better term, if I try to use the genus term to most of my customers, they'll think I'm crazy. So I don't generally do that. Every oyster has a top and a bottom. Have we discussed that?
We have not. We have not. When you go to eat oyster, Chris had brought this up earlier, you'll notice a cup side on the oyster. Okay, you'll see a deep cup on the oyster. All right, and then you'll see a flat side. When we go to shuck them, which Chris is going to show you in just a minute on how to do that, you want to do it cup side down, and when you barbecue, you want to do it cup side down so it can hold the oyster's liquor. So, you want to give us a quick lesson on shucking?
You grab a pretty towel here. Okay, as before, the oyster has a top and a bottom. You always want to stop with the top facing up, of course. Now, let's talk about oyster knives, for example. There's many different kinds out there. You can use a screwdriver. I've used a pocket knife. I've used the back of my truck, as a matter of fact, because I was hurting for a place to do it. But the easiest way is to use an oyster shucker knife. Look for one with a raised tip. You can see that a little bit. That gives you a little bit of leverage when you open up the oyster. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to pop it with the oyster knife, and then we're going to shave over the top, because that's where the muscle is that holds the top shell on. We're going to shave that off so it looks like that, the finished product. See that little abductor muscle there? So what you're trying to do is pop that off. Once you get that off, you take this scooper on the bottom to clean the bottom abductor muscle. Then you're ready to eat it.
Every oyster will have a hinge, and you will see a little opening. And it's as if God said, hey, we're going to get you a place to put that oyster knife. And you put it right inside the hinge, and you can pop it. And you don't force it, you twist. Getting that right in there. Give it a little boom,
See, it's up, and then you watch the oyster knife go over the top, cut off the abductor muscle, left with that, clean off the bottom one, and the favorite part is to you.
Bingo.
That's the best part.
Would you do a few
It
first?
sounds really easy, doesn't it? No, it is.
It is
Several
easy.
varieties of these are really difficult to open. The Kumamotos are probably our least favorite because it's such a tough shell. The Beausoleils, in addition to being the best tasting, in my humble opinion,
There you go.
are also the easiest to open. Maybe that's part of the reason why I like
Yeah,
them so
no,
much.
they've got that definite briny flavor. I enjoy that.
Beausoleil for you.
There you go.
Get rid of this stuff.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers. To your health. And it does go excellent with wine, although, being raised in Minnesota, we didn't have a whole lot of oysters. In fact, I think we had 3, and they all came in a can.
Yeah.
And so when I first got involved in the kitchen field, I discovered oysters and all their many uses, and I fell in love with them. Absolutely. I could eat these guys breakfast, lunch, and dinner anytime. My doctor wouldn't care for it.
Actually, let me interject. It used to be that oysters were thought to be very heavy in cholesterol, not good for you because of that. Research has showed that they're very high in omega-3s. Yay! Fish, omega-3s, remember the two, they correlate. Very high, and because of that, oysters are, they're good for your good HDL, your good cholesterol, raises that, lowers your LDL. Number 2, everybody always talks about oysters and their aphrodisiac, is that a word? The fact that it's an aphrodisiac.
That
There you
thing.
go. Effect. And where does that come
I'm
from?
going to skip right over.
Well, the aphrodisiac idea or fact comes from they're very high in zinc. And zinc is a precursor for testosterone. Okay, which we all need.
I'm gonna drink to the zinc.
And use. You like that?
I'll drink to the zinc any
All
time of the day. You
Zinc
know.
is good
I
for
love the
all.
zinc.
So they're very high in the zinc. That'll raise your testosterone, and that's where you get the idea of aphrodisiac. Plus the fact that we've always seen the Romans at their orgies eating them, but that's side fact. All right, I had kind of ventured away from. So why are there 10 to 12 different oysters on the menu at a restaurant? And I get back to it really quick. Most of those oysters, we showed you there are only 5 varieties. You won't probably find Olympias on many menus because of their size. People, when they're paying $1.50 to $2, want more than an Olympia. You won't find Belons, which are big plate-shaped oysters. And you won't find those because they cost twice that.
And the French keep all the good ones.
So, although you're growing some here, they don't grow very well. So we do basically have 3 types of oysters: the Kumamoto, which is a hybrid, the Gigas, and the Virginicus, or Pacific and the Atlantic and the Kumamoto. So how do you get 10 different oysters out of those 3? Well, in the area of, say, Chef's Creek or Reach Island, they are the mineral content of the water, the salinity of the water is very different. So they're trade names. They're allowed to call that oyster that name, even though it's genetically related to the one just down the way, and therefore put its different name on the menu. Let's use a popular one here in Napa Valley, Hog Island. Tomales Bay is a great oyster area, wonderful. But Hog Island has made a great name for himself because they're growing what's called a sweetwater. Why is it a sweetwater? Because it's grown in an area where there's more fresh than salt. So it's not briny, henceforth it must be sweet. That's where you get the sweetwater from. So that's why you have so many different oyster names. They're trade names. It's great to try them side by side. I did an event up at the winery recently, and we put out 3 distinctly different area oysters, Pacific oysters. And it was amazing, the mineral content and the salinity difference of each one.
It's basically marketing is what it comes down to.
Marketing, and there's difference. Some people don't want a heavy briny flavor, don't want a heavy mineral flavor. Then you take something that you find that you like.
Well, that's what I like to do when folks come into the store. They want oysters, they don't know what they have, so I'll give them a taste of 4 or 5 different ones, with the exception of the Kumamoto, which I will save for last because it trashes your palate. Say what you like about the thing. It's such a creamy oyster. If I give you a taste of that and taste on any of these, you're just going to taste that Kumamoto for 5 or 10 minutes.
And you're exactly right. The Kumamoto has this huge glycogen. For some reason, the genetic makeup of the Kumamoto is it stores glycogen. Glycogen is a fat, and that's where the creaminess. Some people love creamy. I like crisp, clean. You like crisp, but some people who eat the Kumamotos really love that creamy flavor of them. Lends itself really well with wine when you do that.
Yeah, but that's all you're going to get.
That is what
no
you
matter
get.
what you taste after that, you're going to have your steak. Well, you're still going to be tasting that Kumamoto.
Something to be said for that.
Just saying that.
Yeah. So, but that's why a Kumamoto has it. Speaking of in the shop, first of all, at our store, we really want you to understand oysters. Ask to sample some. Come in, and you should be able to do that at really any fish market. Can I try your this oyster, your Beau Soleil, your Reach Island, whatever? Try it, see if it works for your palate. Okay? So when you're buying an oyster, we can jump right to that. What are we looking for in an oyster? Well, oysters are basically rocks. We talked about they may remain sedentary and they don't move off the substrate. Okay? That's a sound of a very full rock. You want an oyster that is closed. Unlike mussels and clams, which sometimes have a little gapping in them, if you push them, tap on them, they'll close up on you. Oysters, you're not going to get any closure. You're not going to. So you want an oyster that's solid shut. Okay, you do not want any gapping at all.
No open mouths. Keep your mouth closed if you're an oyster.
That's it. So that's what you're doing. How do you store them?
Storing is pretty simple. When I give it to you, I'm going to put it in a plastic bag at the store or a net bag. The worst thing you can do is leave fish, and any fish, especially shellfish, in plastic, because plastic kills. This is Mikey's thing. Plastic kills. If there was a poster at the store, that's what it would look like. Plastic kills. Get it out of the plastic, put it on crushed ice with a wet towel on it. It doesn't have to be seawater. They don't care. They're perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, holding live crabs, live lobsters, same thing.
Yeah.
Keep them in the fridge with a wet towel on them, and they'll be perfectly fine for days.
So, in fact, a little side story, and you won't find this anymore, but back in the day, in the early 70s, or actually 80s, on the East Coast, I used to deal with a supplier who would keep his oysters all winter long in his basement, out of the water because it was too cold to harvest. So you keep it in the basement. When you think about it, it's cold.
True.
You know, basement's really, really cold. So it's about 40 degrees, 30, which is an optimum 40, 45 degrees optimum storage temperature. And they didn't open up and they didn't die. They basically hibernated. Now you can't do that now. The law says you have to, you have a shelf life on them and you have to move them in a certain amount of time. But that's the old days.
I didn't know you could get away with that.
Well, they were still alive. So, what are you doing here, Chris?
We are waking up just a quick mignonette. This is just a down and dirty version. There's probably 10,000 mignonette recipes out there. It's a traditional sauce that goes with shucked oysters. Personally, I think if you need a mignonette, you shouldn't be eating oysters in the first place. But that's my opinion. You know, I'm one of those opinionated guys. But what I'm going to do is show you how to make a really quick one with 2 types of vinegar. One is a champagne vinegar because it's soft. And I just used a couple of ounces, and then I touch it with a little rice wine vinegar. It's a little more harsh, a little more acidic, and it works. Touch of brown sugar, salt, and black pepper, which is the traditional. Now, as that works down, all you do is just kind of, you're melting the sugar into it, basically, is what we're doing here. Then I'm going to taste it, and if I like it, we're going to continue with the finishing touch. That's actually not bad. I'm going to put a touch more sugar in there because I'm a sweet guy. This is your turn to say something.
No, I'm just going to let you think you're a sweet guy.
You almost had me there. We also offer at the store, we do oyster gigs for people. If you want to do 200 or 300 oysters for a party at your house, we'll be happy to come by and do that for you. We have people that's standing by, real professionals, not like Mike and myself. I mean, real oyster guys. We've got one guy, Leo, who actually did a party for, and he did 1,200 oysters himself. I think his forearms were like rubber when he was finished. We're not going to do that to him anymore. I thought that was rather unfair.
Now, it is mignonettes are very traditional and everything. I like Chris, and just give me the oyster. I enjoy the oyster the way it is. All the nuances, all the mineralities. But a mignonette's a very classic way to go and way to treat your oysters. All right.
Okay, and I just finished it up with that and just a little bit of diced, or actually minced shallot and some chives. It's just really simple, and that's just to add crunch. You don't really need to do that, but traditionally, that's how folks like
All
them.
right, why don't we give that to our cameraman?
I think we should. You don't have any ballon.
Shoot that one down, sir.
One for you?
Thank you.
I suppose I gotta try one myself.
Gracie.
Tradition dictates.
We're gonna give Gracie one too.
Good. You
Susan?
see, you guys thought this was gonna be boring today.
Oh, never going with Michael.
Susan?
Very nice.
All right, so that's our trip down oysters. Absolutely wonderful trip, but as this show has done since the beginning, there's always issues.
Issues. My favorite part of the program.
Issues. We could still eat oysters while we talk issues.
Oh, I'm planning on it.
When there's the old adage with oysters, do not eat them in months with R in it. Where does that come
There's a
from?
reason for that.
There is a reason, somewhat, and it has been altered, but let's talk a little bit about it. Months without R are May, June, July, and August. Summer! That's the correlation. Oysters spawn in the summer. They love warm water. Technically, I think it's like 67 degrees, depending on the type of oyster. Once the water temperature gets to a certain degree, that's it. It's party time. Oysters start their spawning process. Okay. What happens during this process? They get that glycogen. We had talked about that before. It gives it. It's not harmful to you. It just doesn't have that same palatability. Okay, they'll get the glycogen, so they'll be real soft, kind of flabby. They won't have that crisp in your face, that great taste.
Slow burn versus a big slap in the face, basically.
Yeah, I thought about it that way. And but they're not harmful. They actually have more nutrients at this stage. Okay, but it's a palatability issue. Is that really what you like in an oyster? Now, we on the West Coast, and more now these days on the East Coast, but definitely on the West Coast, with the farming that's going on, they're able to actually avoid the heavy spawning periods by keeping the water going deeper in the water temperatures, not harvesting those oysters during that time period and moving to a different area. So it's really not such an issue these days. There's always oysters available somewhere on the Pacific and the Atlantic because of the wonderful farming practices. These days almost every single aquaculture cultivating farm has a marine biologist in their employment. So, that way they are really on top of what's going on. Okay, so that's reason number one. Reason number two is actually a really serious issue. Reason number two involves toxins. When the summer hits and the water heats up, algae bloom. In other words, you just get these, what we used to call red tides. They no longer call them red tides, they call them algal blooms, where all of a sudden a green algae or red algae will just take off and explode. Okay, we explained before, they're filter feeders. So they're sucking in all this algae and spitting out clean water. In heavy amounts, this algae is not good for us. Okay? But we are heavily regulated. When there's an algal bloom going on, they shut down that whole area. There's no harvesting. Presently in Washington, they're just starting to open up certain areas that were closed down because of the bloom. But the shellfish industry is the most regulated part of our business. In fact, it is probably the safest thing you can eat because they are so tested on every batch of oysters that they're constantly testing them for anything that's going to be an issue. So the algal bloom, they can see and take care of in the water, they shut it down. Okay, so that's one reason for not in the month of R. The government will take care of that for you. I don't trust the government. But the fact is they're very good.
That's a different show altogether.
Yeah, he's a Native American. But the fact is they're very good at shutting down and taking proactive measures on algal blooms. But there is an even more serious event, and that's a bacterium called Vibrio. There's 2 types of Vibrio. This is why you will not find Gulf oysters in California. They're actually illegal in California. Gulf oysters get warm. That water warms up, and they have, Vibrio is a natural occurring bacterium. There's 2 types. One, they've got these big long names. One of them's really dangerous. The other one will just give you intestinal problems. Okay, we have the intestinal problem ones on the West Coast. We don't have the other one. The only Vibrio that's really dangerous is in the Gulf. Because of the warm waters, this Vibrio can take off. Again, it's naturally occurring. There's no way to stop it, but you have to test for it. Okay, and you won't see Gulf oysters in California because of Vibrio. Not that they are, it's always dangerous, but we don't even mess with it. Okay, now there is the other Vibrio that we have on the West Coast, the Parahimalicus, which is rather troublesome to our digestive tract. And this is how great our government really is. Presently in Tamales Bay, if you were to go up today to Tamales Bay to eat oysters from Tamales Bay, you will not get oysters from Tamales Bay because they are presently testing higher than normal levels of Vibrio, so they've shut them down, no harvesting. Okay, that is the real reason for not to eat oysters in the month of R. That's where it stems from. But again, we have heavy controls to stop that. So it is no longer really an issue. I think the funnier part, or the more difficult part for me as a fish guy, is oysters are at their peak in the winter.
Yeah, and nobody wants them.
You know, when the water's cold, but you want to eat oysters when it's warm. You want to sit out the deck, drink some wine, have some Napa Smith beer, and suck down some oysters. And unfortunately, they're at their peak really in the winter when they're at their tastiest. So those are our issues with oysters. In essence, with cultivation methods the way they are nowadays, with government interaction, and with our understanding of the life cycle of oysters, eat.
Enjoy. These guys really do take care of
They
their
are
farm
good
oysters.
stuff. Very good. So,
Are there any wild oysters left on the planet anymore?
yes. Are they eaten? Yes.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. You will find wild oysters not on the West Coast. You'll find them on the East Coast, but they're moving almost exclusively to farm raised, just because it's easier to control. And my advice is, with all shellfish, use cultivated. It's really tested.
Clean
and
water,
taken care
clean
of.
water, clean water.
There you go. And on all of oysters, I left this in here, there's actually certification tags to make sure these oysters have been tested
Another one of those.
and certified. Okay? So what Chris just did was finished off with a shooter.
Well, that's a clean one. There's absolutely no alcohol involved with that. 'Cause as you well know, I'm a teetotaler.
You shuck a couple more.
Long Island iced teetotaler, actually.
Explain what goes into an oyster shooter, Chris.
Oyster shooter can be any number of things. Basically, I think you need an oyster in there somewhere.
You do.
Fairly certain about that. A little touch of cocktail sauce, and my own secret, which is a wild. This is actually wasabi, fresh wasabi. We're gonna have this available in the store tomorrow. It comes in
Nice.
a little 5-ounce.
Is this the
package.
stuff from Oregon?
Nope,
No.
Japan.
Because
It's a little island over there just west of La Mesa, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, and then the finishing, oh my God, this one's gonna hurt. A little touch of your friend and mine, Mr. Nichols, little tequila. Now that's optional, you can use, actually I thought about using limoncello this morning, just for the citrus.
And thank God you didn't.
Really? Not a
I'd rather
fan?
go to tequila.
We'll talk.
But that is our trip down to oysters. Enjoyed it very much. Go out and eat some. They're worth it.
Please.
Thank you. ToutSuite.